Hey, this is Clay from the Startup Takeoff, and I'm going to do a series of videos on books. Reading has been one of the most important things over the last 3 years that has helped me build the business that I have and helped us push through to success. And I have a couple ideas on the topic of reading, and I'd like to share them with you. So this one, I'm going to talk about what I call billionaire brainwashing. And I would say this is the quickest way to absolutely transform your life and absolutely transform your approach and your attitude towards business and entrepreneurship. And what the challenge is that you take all of the autobiographies of people who have built billion-dollar businesses and made over $1 billion in net worth for themselves, and most of them started from scratch, and read their autobiographies and study them and do it all in a really short period of time, or at least that's what I did, and I found it very interesting. So I'll talk about what I found out. I have some of them here. This is Ray Kroc, who created McDonald's, Sam Walton, who created Walmart, Steve Jobs created Apple, Donald Trump, but his book's in there. We have Gerbikesh, who created some of the first contextual ads and sold it to Yahoo. Richard Branson, who created Virgin Group, and Warren Buffett from Berkshire Hathaway. But really, there's you'll notice that the trends in these books these people's extraordinary lives all touched on commonalities, and these commonalities, I like to think of them as sort of universal truths. And the quicker you can discover them and start applying them in your life, the quicker you can speed up your road to success. So I'm just going to go through and share you what I mean by that. So a couple quotes that I pulled together. So in Ray Kroc, Grinding It Out, he's talking about his experience building McDonald's. And the first concept that is a recurring concept in every single book is the ability to lead and inspire people and get them to inspire action in a certain direction. So all of these people were leaders, and if you're going to do anything great or anything really large, you're going to have a lot of help. And let me just read this quote. My executive style was prone. I like to get people fired up, fill them with zeal for McDonald's, and watch the results in their work. That's Ray Kroc. Let's listen to what Sam Walton has to say from Walmart. He says, rule number 3, he's talking about the 10 rules for running a successful company. Rule 3, motivate your partners. Money and ownership alone aren't enough. Constantly, day by day, think of new and more interesting ways to motivate and challenge your partners, employees, people you work with. Set high goals, encourage competition, and then keep score. What does Steve Jobs have to say? Steve Jobs. Steve had a way of motivating people by looking at the bigger picture. The result was that the Macintosh team came to share Jobs' passion for making a great product, not just a profitable one. Steve Jobs, in this book, after he got kicked out of Apple, he moved on to Next. He started the company Next, which never succeeded, but perhaps one of his greatest accomplishments was getting a team of extremely skilled engineers who had job options, who could have done anything, and got them to work 80, 90 hours a week on a company that clearly had no future, but it was by his personal ability to inspire and animate people by sharing big picture ideas, which is a commonality with all of these. The next one, there's one more quote in here that I got to transition here, and every single one of these business leaders goes through this. Rule number 1, commit to your business. Believe in it more than anybody else. I think I overcame every single one of my personal shortcomings by the sheer passion I brought to my work. The sheer passion, because if you are endlessly passionate, you can overcome so much that will bring you from a B or a C player all the way up to an A player just because of that passion. What does that mean? That's like an endless sense of ownership, an endless sense of curiosity, constantly improving, never being happy with the status quo, loving what you do, and sharing that enthusiasm with people around you. In a business perspective, when you're working on a team, the really passionate people like that, it's incredibly valuable. And speaking of that, Donald Trump says, surround yourself with people you can trust. I often say it's good to be paranoid, but not when it comes to your home team. You have to surround yourself with people you trust. Your team, your core team, and in business, it's going to be like a family. And now I'm with Amy and Drew and the people that we have on Odesk. We really have a team spirit. It's almost a family spirit. And that you have to be able to trust these people that you're going to be working with. And that's a key ingredient in every one of these stories that ties into what it takes to be a great leader. So Gerbikesh, who he started his first business when he was 16 and sold it for 40 million, started another business and sold it when he was 25 for 400 million. So he knows a thing or two. And the one thing in here that I thought was that I wanted to share on the topic of committing to your business, he says, he's telling a story. I'm a complete failure, he said, tears streaming down his cheeks. I failed my family. I owe you all an apology. A few days later, with no explanation whatsoever, my father snapped out of his depression. One way or another, we were going to move into that new house, he said. And I remember being powerfully affected by the sudden change in attitude. That resilience and determination would forever be ingrained in my thinking, and the lesson was clear: never give up. And when you read and you see that every single person had this attitude, especially when they were building their businesses. And I wrote this here. I read it in all my books with scratch and highlighting. I wrote, never, 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 never give up, and fully commit to your business. For me, it might be multiple businesses, but never give up, because that's like multiplying by zero. Once you give up, you multiply by zero, and you axe yourself out. As long as you never multiply by zero, you keep giving yourself chances. The next lesson is really important in this book, and because he started his first business when he was 16 and his second business when he was 20, he obviously didn't have a very large skill base, and he gives brilliant advice to people who are bootstrapping businesses. And with the Startup Takeoff and what I've done in my business now and the businesses that fail, and because we're not starting technology startups, not building some kind of technology and then trying to sell a company in an exit, you're bootstrapping a business in a competitive space. He says, start slow and steady, get to parity, then innovate. People think you need to innovate right away, that you need to have some idea or some way of doing things that's different. If you're entering a competitive area, get to that minimum bar of excellence first. Then once you're at the minimum bar of excellence across the board, then you innovate. And what he says is, that's what I did. I over-executed the competition. And that's what you have to do. In terms of performance, delivery, professionalism, that's what got me noticed. My attitude was simple. I knew I could do it. I knew I could do it better. And I knew that I wasn't going to be the best coming out of the gate. I would begin by catching up with the other guys, the guys who got there first, then I'd leave them in the dust. And that's what you can do if you're bootstrapping a business, is quickly catch up to parity and then use that momentum and keep going. Then you innovate. And that's what we've done in our business, and it's worked. The next thing here is really, really interesting. He says, never relax, never rest on your laurels. Always look for a way to deliver more than is expected of you. And when you're doing well, don't get complacent. Stay hungry and work harder than the competition. In order to stand out in an increasingly crowded field, I had to be better than the rest of them. The reality is we live in a competitive world, and somebody commented on the Startup Takeoff saying, Clay, you guys have got a lot more serious lately. Isn't that at odds with your desire for freedom and why you got into internet marketing in the first place? And to that I have to say, don't rest on your laurels. If you find a way to build a freedom business, some sort of online system that generates income to you, $3,000 a month or more, you probably have some sort of competitive advantage. And you should be fully maxing that out. And to let your skill set or your competitive edge turn over, which will happen very rapidly online with changing technology or competition, both are changing super fast, you're actually doing yourself a disservice, and you have a duty to fully capitalize on any opportunities you build yourself, especially if you grind and you push really hard for a number of years. And he's an interesting story, as after he exited his second business, he was known for going to Vegas and partying quite a bit, buying $200,000 sports cars and stuff like that. So freedom will come, and don't get it too early, right? When you're building your business, commit all out. Richard Branson, on the topic of never giving up, because when you give up, that's like multiplying by zero. If you have anything, if you build anything and then you give up, you multiply it by zero, it gets wiped to nothing. On the other end, if you just keep trying, you give yourself chances. And even if those chances are 1% or 0.1%, if you never stop executing, you never stop giving yourself chances, eventually you'll hit. And when people look at businesses, or the lives of successful people, they often see key moments and attribute them to luck. But really what's happening is there's a historian's bias, and what that means is if in your business or in your life you have a success, that stays with you and that exists. If it's a business, it's something that exists and continues to go because it was successful. If you fail, that no longer exists, because if it was a business and failed, it doesn't exist. So it no longer is in the consciousness of anybody, but your successes stay, and because of that, you only see the successes, you only see the result, you don't see all the failures. And that's why it's so important just to keep trying, even though, and just have an understanding that you'll never be able to predict those low probability events, but know that they will happen, and you have to be tenacious. And Richard Branson tells the story on the role of luck and just executing. When he started Virgin Records and early in his career, and he had a recording studio, and a band recorded Tubular Bells, which was an instrumental track, and he was trying to sell it to, I don't know, a producer or something, and he kept harassing this guy, calling him, sending him copies of the track, saying, listen to it, it's great, but he was getting no interest because at the time instrumentals weren't really popular, didn't think it could be sold, so the person didn't want to sign the record or something like that or buy the rights to it. And the guy he was harassing was one day in his office alone listening to it when a movie exec popped into his office in London, and the movie exec, before the guy could turn off the track, the movie exec was like, what is this? And it was the song Tubular Bells, and that Richard Branson kept harassing the guy to listen to. And the movie executive, by the serendipitous meeting, ended up buying the rights to that music, and it was the soundtrack for The Exorcist, which was a huge mega hit. And then that launched Virgin Records, which was one of Richard Branson's first businesses. From an outsider's perspective, it's a really lucky event that launched the brand, but Richard Branson knew that every time he tried, even every time he takes that shot, that's like multiplying by 0.1%. You have a 0.1% chance, maybe. And if you ever give up, that's like multiplying by 0. So all of your previous efforts just get wiped. And all of these business leaders touch on the same topic in execution and being tenacious and committing and never giving up. Because when you give up, you're done. It's over. And you have to understand that the improbable events that will build your business or that you'll stumble upon, you can't predict them, but they will happen. And the more shots you take, the more chances you give yourself of finding those. And the last book was Warren Buffett, who built Berkshire Hathaway. And the quote here is this. This is from the outsider's perspective looking at Berkshire Hathaway. As he tells the story, a series of happy accidents built Berkshire Hathaway. A money-making machine sprang up without design. So from the outsider's perspective, the company was built by a series of fortunate events that were unpredictable, and it looks like there was no real design or no mastermind behind it. And maybe that's true, but maybe Warren Buffett just was tenacious and kept trying and gave himself the best odds he possibly could. And how would an investor give himself the best odds he possibly could in his business? And from the words of Warren Buffett, or not from the words of Warren Buffett, but about Warren Buffett, that passion led him to study a universe of 1,000 stocks. It made him burrow into libraries and basements for records nobody else troubled to get. He sat up nights studying hundreds of thousands of numbers that would glaze anyone else's eyes over. He read every word of every newspaper each morning and sucked down the Wall Street Journal like his morning Pepsi, then Coke. He spent months reading old newspapers dating back a century to learn the cycles of business, the history of Wall Street, the history of capitalism, the history of the modern corporation. He followed the world of politics intensely and recognized how it affected business. He analyzed economic statistics until he had a deep understanding of what they signified. He never stopped thinking about business, what made a good business, what made a bad business, how they competed, what made customers loyal to one versus another. If that doesn't change the way you think about your own business and how you approach a success and bootstrapping your own enterprise, then I don't really know how to convince you otherwise. There's one last line in here. Since childhood, he had read every biography he could find of people he admired, looking for the lessons he could learn from their lives. And that's from Warren Buffett, reading every biography he could get his hands on. Because if you can learn the lessons from other people's extraordinary lives, you can save yourself from making the mistakes you can save yourself the extremely high cost of making mistakes, some of which would be irreversible. And on top of that, any positive lessons that you learn, that you take from these people's lives, you can then integrate into your life and start reaping the rewards of that every single time you live through that principle or that lesson that you learned. And that's the Billionaire Brainwashing Challenge, which I am excited to share with you. It was a fun challenge that I did. So you don't necessarily have to read these books, but find about 10 autobiographies, biographies of billionaires, preferably if they started from scratch, and read them all in the shortest amount of time possible. And then report back to me and tell me what you learned. But what you'll notice is that there's so many commonalities, these truths, these universal truths that keep popping up that lead to success, and lead to success in business, and you can see how that's affected all of their lives and where they ended up. But I'm going to prescribe one more book. When you're done the Billionaire Brainwashing Challenge, pick up Hard Times by Studs Terkel. This is a book, it's a collection of 200 mini stories from people who lived from all walks of life who lived through the Great Depression in the 1930s in the United States. And it has stories of people losing everything, of people losing their jobs, their pensions, their wealth. Some people prospered, some people were extremely resourceful. And after studying wealth, the accumulation of wealth and the principles behind it, study poverty and study the principles of how people lose wealth. And what you'll notice is opportunity comes and goes, and one of the biggest predictors of people who succeed and survive is resourcefulness. But I have one story that I really want to share with you here. This is from a banker who was giving out loans to businesses, and after the stock market collapsed, he wasn't allowed to give any loans out. But he says, a cigar stock at the time was selling for $115 a share. The market collapsed. I got a call from the company president. Could I loan him $200 million? I refused because at the time I had to protect my own fences, including those of my closest friends. His $115 stock dropped to $2, and he jumped out the window of his Wall Street office. And I've carried this book around with me for the last 2 or 3 years. I carry it in my carry-on everywhere. And these mini stories, in periods where I get depressed or I get down and out, I usually pick this up and I read through some of them. And it's definitely a way to center yourself and realize that we do live in a time with enormous opportunity. So I would recommend that. And if you do pick this book up and you read it, really please come back to this video and post your thoughts on it, and if you'd recommend it to anyone else. So that's a Billionaire Brainwashing Challenge. I hope you enjoyed that, and until next time, I'm out.